Okay, good morning. If you could come in and get seated, please. What I'd like to do is just to begin with a blessing, and then in about 10 minutes from now, the formal program would begin. But I want to get everyone seated, so let me pray. Heavenly Father, I do thank you for today, and I do thank you for every person that's here. May you bless each one of us abundantly. I thank you for the gift of prayer, that you are interested in each one of us, love us, and that you want the best for us. And I thank you for this opportunity we have to get together, to experience this event, and to enjoy this food. And I thank you for the hotel staff who are serving us. I ask that you guide each person who comes before this group from this podium, and I pray this event will be an encouragement and a blessing to all who are here. Amen. So I'll be back in about 10 minutes, and we'll start the program. So put your name on the name tag if possible, and we'll be back and begin the program. Thank you. We'll be inspired by what you hear. Well, the Silicon Valley Prayer Breakfast is not affiliated with any single church, and we're not affiliated with any single denomination. And if you've had a chance to look at the bios of our keynote speakers today, you'll see a good example of that. You may have noticed in the bios that Dr. Cheryl Ho is a graduate of Stanford, and Rex Walheim is a graduate of Cal Berkeley. Now, I know most of us don't consider Cal and Stanford as religious denominations, but I can tell you from my experience there are some pretty rabid supporters of both schools, and they seem to do that with religious fervor. But anyway, we're not associated with any single denomination. So the theme today is the joy of serving. Several years ago, I heard a message from sociologist Tony Campolo, and some of you might have been at the event. It was at Ricky's Hyatt. And he asked a very interesting question to the audience, and I'll ask you to consider that question today. His question was, what do you most want for your children? So think about your answer to that. What do you most want for your children? Well, in a survey, Campolo found that most Americans answer that question, happiness. Most want happiness for your children. Now, interestingly, he did the same survey of people in Japan, and the Japanese had a different answer. Their answer was success. Campolo went on to argue that the emphasis on both sentiments is misplaced. He went on to argue that true happiness and true success comes from serving other people. Well, today we have a chance to hear how two people, Dr. Cheryl Ho and astronaut Rex Walheim, are serving in very different fields. And you'll also hear what motivates them to serve. Well, we like to think of the Silicon Valley Prayer Breakfast as about conversations. So you've enjoyed some conversation now, and conversations about faith, about the important issues of life. And again, you'll have a chance to share around the table at the end of the event today. But also conversations with God. And of course, prayer is a conversation with God. We have a loving God who cares for us, who wants a personal relationship with us, and we communicate with him through prayer. Well, let me go through a few logistics. I haven't heard any cell phones go off, and please make sure your cell phones are turned off. I also want to call your attention to in the program, there's a list of nonprofit sponsors, and I meant to bring one up, but if you there are blue response cards at the tables. I'd ask you to take a look at those and encourage you to visit. We have a few of those nonprofit sponsors in the hall that offer volunteer opportunities, and these could be opportunities from anything like helping disadvantaged people, helping the homeless, helping children in foster care, helping troubled teenagers, and so on. So there are some volunteer opportunities that are available. And if you don't have time after the event to visit some of those, the tables in the hallway, feel free just to check off, and we'll send you some material from each one of those groups. You'll also notice some books piled on your desk. This is a gift from us. It's been a donation from the International Bible Society, and it's our gift to you. So feel free to take one if you want to use it for your own personal use, or if you'd like to give the book of Psalms to someone else, please feel free to do so. Psalms, of course, are a book of the Bible, a book of prayers, prayers of thanksgiving, prayers of petition, and just wonderful, wonderful prayers. So feel free to take one if you'd like. And as I said, we will do our best to try to end on time at 8:30. So now I'd like to welcome our musical group, Gloria. If you could come up and they'll sing Great and Awesome God. And following their song, Elizabeth Lewis, Atherton City Council member, will offer a prayer for special needs.
This is a day of celebration. This is the day to praise Almighty God, who loves and sustains us, faithful in every way. Lord, rejoice with your people down through the ages, your mighty deeds to share. You have been faithful to all generations, this truth we now declare. You are a great and awesome God, your wonders we proclaim. You are our rock, our strength, our shield, from age to age the same. You forgive us all our sins. You transform us with your love. With joyful, grateful hearts we sing. You are a great and awesome God. This is a day of celebration. This is a time to rejoice. This is the day to look to the future and give our songs a voice. With courage and faith we are running the race. We are reaching for the prize. Our hope is to be found worthy of our calling in Jesus Christ. We are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, called from darkness into light, so we must testify. You are great and awesome God, your wonders we proclaim. You are our rock, our shield, from age to age the same. You forgive us all our sin. You transform us with your love. With joyful, grateful hearts we sing. You are great and awesome God. You are a great and awesome God. You are a great and awesome God. A great and awesome God.
Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Lewis, and I'm very honored to be here and pray with you today. Prayer is powerful. And in examining my life, I realized that while I don't spend as much time down on my knees in prayer as I'd like to, I seem to be praying all the time. In the car driving, oh God, please part the traffic so I can get to my destination on time. In the grocery line, buying dinner supplies, please, dear God, help me make something delicious out of these ingredients, or at least something edible. Before, and sometimes even during, those city council meetings that I now preside over, I call out to God, please give me wisdom beyond my abilities so that I can make sound decisions. And it seems to me that there's not just one way to pray or one prayer. That prayer comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors of the rainbow. For instance, the red-hot prayer of panic and fear, and I call out, God, please, God, help me, save me from this mess I've made. And then there's the bright, yellow, sunny prayers that are almost like breathing, and I utter up all throughout the day. Oh, dear God, thank you so much for this beautiful day, for the spring tulips, for my wonderful husband, for my grandchildren, and for loving me. The cool, blue, healing hand of God is when I need His touch in my life to heal my brokenness, restore my strength. And then there's the pure white light of the prayer of praise, when God's presence is so close to me that I call out, Heavenly Father, thank you for filling me with your Holy Spirit, so that in everything I do and in everything I say, your love and your light shines through me. I am grateful and humbled that I know God in this personal way. But you know, I know that there are those in our local communities who aren't as fortunate as I am. There are those who are suffering through the murky gray of depression, or stuck in the black hole of despair due to broken relationships, loss of jobs, financial turmoil, hunger, homelessness, and hopelessness, not knowing what to do, where to go, or who to turn to. I believe that we in this room can make a difference in those lives. And so will you please join me with your thoughts and your prayers as we lift up to God those in our local community who are suffering today. Dear Heavenly Father, we lift up to you those in our local communities who need your grace, those who have lost their jobs, their homes, their businesses, and who are in financial crisis, those who are sick and cannot work, for those who are stuck in the black hole of despair and have lost all hope. Lord, touch our hearts and our souls today to open doors for us and reach out and meet those in needs. In your holy name, amen.
Good morning, I'm Janet Goodman from City Team Ministries, and I've got a question for you. Who would predict that a young woman from a reasonably well-off home, or that this microphone would have done that, who would predict that a young woman from a reasonably well-off home in the Midwest would choose as her career work among the homeless of Silicon Valley? Cheryl Ho is the medical director of the Valley Homeless Health Care Program and an affiliate clinical instructor at Stanford University School of Medicine. She has made a deliberate choice that her practice of medicine will focus on those who are struggling with homelessness, addiction, and mental illness. And yet, Cheryl's compassion for this underserved community is not limited to what we would call her office hours, for she's the co-founder of the Silicon Valley Christian Health Alliance, a nonprofit volunteer organization that provides free medical and dental care and spiritual support to the residents of City Team San Jose's homeless shelter and recovery programs. It's been a real pleasure to get to know Cheryl. and to see how she literally puts herself out there for others. Now, that's taken her to some unexpected territory and to some experiences that growing up in the Midwest she never would have imagined. But she's here this morning to share with us her thoughts about this life of service that she has chosen. And I can think of few people who better exemplify our theme this morning of joy of service. So Cheryl, we'd like to welcome you to the program this morning, and we're eager to hear what the joy of service means to you.
My background may be similar to many of yours. I grew up in an incredibly loving and nurturing family. My mom is here today, in the comfort of suburban Ohio, where poverty is not that in your face as it is in some major urban centers. One particular memory that stands out in my mind as I was growing up that really struck me or changed me was a memory of sitting in the back seat of my parents' car as a child. And we were driving to Music Hall in downtown Cincinnati. And now, if any of you are familiar with Cincinnati, in order to get to Music Hall, you have to pass through some less affluent areas of the city. And as a child, that discrepancy really hit me deeply. I remember sitting in the back seat of my parents' car, looking out, seeing the poverty around me, and really thinking, gosh, that could be me. I very much could have been a child, but yet born on the other side of the car window, car door, but on the other hand, I happened to be sitting on the inside of the car instead. I think growing up, at those moments, I realized at that early age that I did not have any control or any say over to what life I was born into. I simply was just born into my life, as we all are. I was no better than anyone else in this world. We're all simply born into our circumstances. And then this truth about mankind shaped my view of human life. As I began working among the homeless, I saw the homeless through a similar lens. Many of my colleagues who are here today and we can share with you some of the personal stories that we hear from our patients that are truly unforgettable. On one hand, we hear such horrendous stories of violence or abuse that we're even amazed that people are still alive to even share their stories. On the other hand, we hear of stories that share an uncommon similarity, strike a very similar chord in our own lives. Personal stories that make us realize that actually many of us are not as far from homelessness as we may think. A particular person who stands out in my mind is a woman that I met at one of our homeless shelter clinics. A real estate agent, she was a woman who did well in her work for a number of years, but then her business took a turn for worse, and she couldn't make ends meet. And about a year or two later, she was evicted. And at the end of that sequence of events is where I met her at one of our shelter clinics. And she stood out. She was a very well-dressed, middle-aged woman who kept to herself. But she stood out in that she was reading novel after novel while waiting to see me in the waiting room. And as I got to know her health concerns a little bit better, I eventually, unfortunately, diagnosed her with lymphoma, a form of lymph node cancer. And this discrepancy struck me deeply. Here was a woman with education and skills who was receiving chemotherapy for almost nearly a year. Yet at the end of every day, here she was having to wait nightly in line at the shelter, at the homeless shelter. Stories like that just really, we see these every day, and it just is so striking. And in this economic downturn, my colleagues and I are only seeing more and more of these tragic stories. Just even earlier this week, my respite team met a 70-year-old man who'd been living in downtown Palo Alto behind a restaurant for many months. He was picking up scraps, eating from boxes left over from this restaurant. And in learning about this story, he was a man who was in the retail business and did well and even earns a pension, even until today. But he spent much of his adult life, he was an only child, taking care of his adult parents. And when they passed away, it seems that he fell into a deep depression and pretty much couldn't move from it, and that's how we ended up on the streets. So again, the truth. I am no better than anyone else. Really, any of these stories could have been one of us. So my first point, I'm not better than anyone else. Second point, number 2, service is an identity, not a task. You know, I think as a culture, we do a really great job of highlighting the value of giving back to our communities. I remember growing up as a high school student, I was encouraged to seek out volunteer opportunities so that my time and energy could be used to help others. During the holidays, many of us, get out there and roll up our sleeves and help out at soup kitchens during the holidays. But as I have been more and more in the trenches of daily service, I've come to realize that the good feeling that you get from service, it sometimes wears out. And, my colleagues and I, they can attest that we get yelled at, we get cursed at, we get manipulated sometimes, and sometimes we wonder if all our work is even helping. Serving is not always glamorous, and it's not always even a completely fulfilling proposition. So what does it mean to serve? In contemplating the meaning of service, I realized that when I started in my career of service, I was operating under the wrong paradigm. I initially thought service was a task, a checkbox, something that you could time in, time out, and then be done with. But I was wrong. If you actually go to the origin of the word for service, it comes from the root definition, to be a servant. Now, this may sound strange, but actually being a slave captures more accurately what I've learned to come to learn about service. The paradigm shift for me was that service is not a task, but rather an identity, a permanent lifestyle, a way of life, a commitment. Let me share with you a personal story. My husband and I are friends with a woman with schizophrenia, who I will call Beth for confidentiality purposes. I met Beth at one of the homeless shelters that I work at, but I also knew Beth because she was someone who came to the church that my husband and I attend. To make a long story short, as we began to know Beth better over time, we began to understand her needs for housing and shelter. And after several months of knowing her, my husband and I decided to take the step of taking her into our home on the weekends so that she can have some stable living for a period of time. I remember how I said that service is not always completely fulfilling. That was our experience with Beth. To put it in a nice way, Beth was not the most considerate of house guests that we've ever had. She was a mess. She would yell and talk loudly every time the door was closed or every time the bathroom door was closed. Kind of scared us sometimes. She left her dirty tissues all over our kitchen counter. And that's the beginning of the story. When we began our efforts to look for permanent housing with her, we learned the hard way that just because you're homeless doesn't mean that you're not picky about where you want to live. We put Beth's name on several housing lists, which, if you're lucky, they may call your name once every several months or so. And when we were fortunate enough to get an appointment, we rushed Beth over to the housing interview, only to have her look just around and say, I don't like the look of the people here, or I don't like the color of the paint in that room. And then she would run out, and we'd just throw our hands up saying, what do we do next? So after 2 or 3 rounds of that, it was, I think, about the 3rd housing interview that we took Beth in, and my husband and I were literally up to here, and we said, okay, Beth, you don't have a choice. This is where you're going to live. And sure enough, it's amazing. It's now almost been a year, and she's been living in a studio somewhere in Sunnyvale, and it's funny because she still comes regularly to us and says, my life was better at the shelter. I really don't like living here in this permanent place. And, to be honest, almost monthly, we still worry that she's just going to walk out. So I could go on and on. But what I learned is that service is not always glamorous, and it's not always fulfilling. But what it is about is the long haul, a commitment, an identity, a conscious decision to hold a set of values regardless of the outcome. A task has a beginning and end, but an identity does not. Service, though, then accurately defined then, is an identity and not a task. So number 1, I'm no better than anyone else. Number 2, service is an identity, not a task. Finally, number 3, and back to my first point, it's not about the service. So people often ask me and my colleagues about how we got into working with the homeless. For me, I have to say that choosing a life of service was actually a natural outgrowth of my being a follower of Jesus Christ. To be completely honest with you all, service is really not the primary endpoint for me, but really following Jesus is. For me, what my life is about, what gets me up in the morning, what makes me tick, is really about responding to the love that Jesus has for me. And in that relationship, of my love for God, the service then comes out. Do you see the difference? Service on my own strength only gets me so far. A pat on the back, a good outcome for my efforts, these things can keep a person going. But what if they stop? I never realized how dependent I was on external affirmations of my service to keep me going until my friendship with Beth. So for me, it's not about the service. For me, it's about the lifetime call to follow and be in a relationship with Jesus. And in that call and in that relationship with him, the service then comes out. And paradoxically, in choosing that call to faith, I actually have more strength than I could imagine, more love, more patience, and actually more service comes out of me than if my life were just about the service. So please permit me to end my time with a paraphrase from a famous passage of the Bible. Some of you are likely familiar with it from the Gospel of Luke, the parable of the Good Samaritan. In this parable, a picture of a man is painted who was robbed and beaten, left nearly for dead on the side of the street. Two individuals came by, one a religious teacher, one a religious leader, who both saw this man who was left for dead, and both separately decided to cross over to the other side of the street and walk on by. Finally, a third man came. This man, who was not a religious leader, from a different culture, went against the cultural norm and grain of the time, stopped, and had compassion on the beaten man. He bandaged him up, he took him on his donkey, and he put him up at a night at the motel. Jesus, at the end of the parable, asks, which of these three was a neighbor to the beaten man? And the answer, of course, was the man who took care of him, the man who had mercy upon him. The call to service is for all of us. It's about seeing each other as fellow brothers and sisters in this life, stopping, pausing, being inconvenienced so that we can help one another. It's not easy. It's not glamorous. It requires a commitment, a perseverance, a willingness to extend and give when we don't think we have the time or the money. For me, the joy of serving exists in the context of a faith that gives me a joy unexplainable, a joy unshakable, a joy that exists regardless of circumstance. It's a faith that gives me a strength upon strength so that I do have the strength to serve daily. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. Well, in these difficult economic times, we're looking for strong leadership. Now, I'd have to say that leading a municipality has to be one of the most difficult jobs there is, with diverse interests, problems, economic issues, and so on. Well, we're fortunate in the Bay Area to have a strong leader who also looks to God for wisdom and guidance, and that's San Jose Mayor Chuck Reed. So join me in welcoming San Jose Mayor Chuck Reed, who will pray for leadership.
Good morning. It's great to be here. I'm humbled to stand in front of so many people who serve God by serving others. It's a calling, and I know that many of you in the room have heeded the words of Jesus and are serving others in many ways. We live in a land of opportunity and freedom and great blessings here in the capital of Silicon Valley, the world center of innovation, where people come from around the world to build better lives for themselves. We're really blessed. But even among us, there are many people who are not so fortunate, people who don't have the resources, who don't have the talents, or just need help. And you've heard some stories about them this morning. And government can't do it all. It's clear government can't do it all. And I want to thank each of you and your organizations, especially the sponsors of this event, for the service that you do to our community to help those in need, to help people who are less fortunate, and to make our community stronger. Each of you has a very important role to play. government also has a role. And government is very challenged during these times. There's no level of government that has got it easy these days. Our elected leaders are called upon to make very tough decisions, sometimes life and death decisions about whether you provide funding for the homeless or funding for the mentally ill or funding for women and children who are in need. All of these are competing interests, and there's not enough money to go around. So our elected leaders at all levels have to make tough choices, and it's important that they be guided in doing that. So I wanted here today to pray for our elected leadership. And, you know, we suffer not only from having to make tough decisions, but we also run the risk of occupational hazard, arrogance, hubris, greed, things that can affect our decision making. So that instead of serving others, we can become self-serving. And so if you'll join with me, I'd like to pray for the leadership of this country. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings that we have. You have granted us so much. And let us never forget the many opportunities that we have because of you. Our elected leadership in this country has to make tough decisions. So we ask, dear Father, that you grant them the wisdom to know what is right, the strength to do what is right, and the humility in service to others, so that we may follow in your path and do your work in service to others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Mayor Reed. Well, how many of us have ever looked up to the skies and thought about what it would be like to be in outer space? I would guess that there are probably some of us here who have dreamed of being an astronaut. Well, Rex Walheim had that dream and is now living it out. He's flown on 2 space missions, the most recent in February of 2008. So please join me in welcoming astronaut and Bay Area native Rex Walheim.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and usually when I share a stage with a Stanford graduate, I have some kind of little quip to say potentially, but Dr. Ho, all I can say today is it's a pleasure and it's an honor to share the stage with you. So thank you for that, those great remarks. What I want to talk about today is the view from above. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my story because that's kind of what I've got. And what I found out is that a lot of times along the way in life, it seems like you're taking wrong turns, U-turns, side turns, detours, and you kind of wonder, is God really directing my life? Am I really following him? Can I find a way to get to where he wants me to be? And I found that it's been a very interesting journey, and after becoming an astronaut, I look back and I see that all the things that I went through, when you look from above and you see God's view of where he took you, it all makes sense. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in San Carlos, as Skip said, and I grew up always having a belief in God and always believing in him, but not really knowing what that meant to my life. Later on, when I got into high school, I had a high school girlfriend, and she was involved in a church, Peninsula Covenant Church up the road here. And I went to the youth group there, and I started to understand what it meant to be a Christian and to really dedicate my life to following Jesus. And I tried to do that in my life. From there, I went on to University of California, and I was involved in a group called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. One of my friends here from there, Brad Wong, is here, who was also in the Bible study there. And that group really taught me what it meant to live my life for Christ day after day. So that's my spiritual background. So I started at a young age. Now, from my interest, I grew up always loving airplanes. You know, when I was a kid at San Carlos High School and at Terra Luna Junior High, I used to draw pictures of airplanes. You know, the kid in the class who draws pictures of airplanes all the time? Yeah, that was me. And so I was always doing that. My father was a pilot in the World War II era, a B-17 pilot, and so he took me to the air shows, and I always loved that. So my big goal was to become an Air Force pilot. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and that was my realistic goal because, yeah, I did want to be an astronaut, but who gets to be an astronaut? Come on. And so I was going to try to go that route, but I was going to be a pilot, a test pilot, and then hopefully become an astronaut. And I hope you don't mind. I brought pictures. It's easier for me to talk with pictures and stuff. So we'll cycle through some of those. But this is me at University of California about 24 years ago or so. My mom and my dad. My path to becoming a pilot and test pilot was going to go through ROTC at Berkeley. I know it kind of sounds like a misnomer, but there is actually ROTC at Berkeley. And so I spent 4 years at Berkeley, and I got a degree in mechanical engineering because I figured, you know, something can go wrong. Good idea, good thing to remember. Something can go wrong. It's good to have a good academic background to rely on. So I studied mechanical engineering, got a degree in there, and worked 4 years in ROTC and got a pilot slot. So I was going to go into pilot training. And this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And so now I pinned on my bars in that picture you saw there, and I headed down to Williams Air Force Base in Arizona, and I was at the gateway of my dreams. I'm like, I'm just so close, I can taste it. Well, one of the things they do down there at pilot training is they give you a physical. Now, I had taken military physicals before, so I didn't think it would be that big of a deal. But just as you would guess, unfortunately, on that physical, the doctors said they heard a heart murmur. So they heard a heart murmur, and after a few more tests, they determined that it was a mitral valve prolapse, which is a type of heart murmur. It wasn't a big health hazard, but it was enough to make me disqualified from pilot training. So my grand 15-year plan was up in smokes in about 2 weeks. So I had a choice to make, and I figured, well, it looks like obviously I'm never become a pilot. Astronaut thing is way out the window now. That's never going to happen. So I was really pretty dejected. And the Air Force gave me a choice. I could either stay in the Air Force or I could and take another assignment, or I could get out. And so my original response was, they kicked me, I'll kick them back. I'm going to get out, I'm going to come back and work down here in Silicon Valley, and I'll get a good job. And I thought, well, you know, I worked 4 years for my commission. It's a long time. Maybe I should give the Air Force a try. So I said, well, I'd like to get assigned to Space Command, work as an engineer in the space business. And I talked to the Space Command detailer, and I said, hey, if I get assigned to Space Command, where will I go? And he said, it looks like probably Colorado Springs or Sunnyvale. I'm like, man, that sounds great. You know, either one of those would be great. So I got recommendations from my old military advisors and my college professors and stuff, and I got assigned to Space Command. So a few weeks later, I called the same guy back. Hey, I got assigned to Space Command. Where are you going to send me? He goes, well, looks like either Omaha, Nebraska, or Cavalier, North Dakota. That's right, Cavalier, North Dakota. I was assigned to a very small radar site up in North Dakota. It's off the picture here, but it was near Cavalier, North Dakota, a town of 1,500 people. So I went from the Bay Area here, and I was 15 miles from that town of 1,500 people. As a young guy, the nearest McDonald's was in a foreign country. And so it was quite a shock. But one thing I found when I was up there, though, that there was one of the first guys I met hated being up there. He just hated it. And as disappointed as I was about not being a pilot, I said, you know, I'm going to try to make the best of this. You know, I'm going to go on some hikes, and there were some pretty areas there. And when it was warm enough, I'd go skiing. Which it was, it's funny, but it's true. If it was below 10 below zero, I said, forget it. It's not worth it. So they like to joke in North Dakota, there's 9 months of winter and 3 months of poor skiing weather. So, so anyways, I was up there for about a year and a half, and I tried to make the best of it. And for a Bay Area boy, got to have a little bit of fun. So when the snow came, I made the snowman and had a little bit of fun with the snow up there, and worked to try to enjoy it the best I could. But it was tough being that isolated. And shortly before I left there, after a year and a half, I got married to my college sweetheart, and we moved down to Houston. The assignment in North Dakota actually gave me a sympathy factor with the military detailers, and they said, yeah, you paid your time there, now we'll send you someplace fun. They sent me to Houston as an engineer. I was working in the Mission Control Center, and I was working on the Space Shuttle program. It was a great job, absolutely great job. And I really enjoyed it and had a chance to do some neat engineering. And along the way, I heard about a program that a person like me could fly as a backseater in airplanes. Now, it was called as a flight test engineer course at test pilot school. So you could apply to this competitive program and become a backseater. They'd give me a waiver for my heart murmur. So I heard more about it. It sounded like a great idea, and so I applied. And unfortunately, when I was down in Houston, I didn't get accepted. And so after a while, I ended up having to find a new job, and I got transitioned up to Colorado Springs. And Colorado is obviously a very beautiful place, and it was a wonderful place to be assigned. But one of the problems, I was assigned at the Headquarters Space Command, which wasn't a tremendously exciting job, but again, being in Colorado was amazing. Now, my wife, my college sweetheart, she didn't come up to Colorado because she couldn't find a job up there right away. And after a while, it became quite apparent that she didn't want to come up there after a while. And so we started going to marriage counseling. I'd fly back down to Houston where she stayed. And it quickly became apparent that the marriage was unraveling. And the hard part about it for me was there was nothing I could do about it. As hard as I wanted to try, after a while it just became apparent that it wasn't going to work and there was no more I could do. So after several rounds of marriage counseling, she told me, no, I'm getting a divorce and there's nothing you can do about it. So I remember coming back home to Colorado after that last bout of marriage counseling and thinking, what am I going to do with my life? I mean, everything I held dear was gone from me now, and I remember walking through the Memphis airport, catch my connecting plane, and just thinking, I had these dreams of having a family and having kids, and it just looks like none of that's going to happen now. And what am I going to do professionally? And so I had an idea that I would I'll get out of the Air Force, I'll move back down to Houston, and I'll be an engineer down at the Mission Control Center. It seems like it's something I liked, and it seemed like the right thing to do. And at that point, I got back to Colorado, and one day I was feeling really bad, and I said, well, I'm just going to go talk to one of the Air Force chaplains to talk through this whole divorce thing and just, try to talk it out. And so I went there with the express purposes of talking about the divorce, and this chaplain, her name was Joy Charity O'Halloran, and she talked to me about it for a while. And in passing, I had mentioned that I had applied to test pilot school once, didn't get accepted, and I was going to not do that anymore. I'm tired of chasing that dream. I'm going to go back down to Houston. And man, this is one of the points in my life where I really think God used somebody to really redirect me. Instead of being what I wanted her to say was, hey, don't worry about it, just take things easy and not, just get yourself back together and just take your time to figure out what you want to do. She said, you need to apply to test pilot school. You need to do that. And I'm like, no, I'm tired of chasing dreams. I tried that once, it didn't work, and I'm not going to do it. And then she said, no, she wouldn't let it go. She said, no, you need to do this. And I'm going, and I had thought about, no, because the application is due in about a month. I'd have to get recommendations written right away. I'd have to go through all this paperwork to get it done, and it's just not going to happen. So I left, and I went out and jogged, and sometimes when I jog, I feel better and stronger, and I thought about it, and I thought, she's right. I really ought to do this. I really ought to apply. And that gave me a new vector in life, a new place. Okay, hey, this is the old way's not going to work. You're going to go ahead and try this. And so I said, I'll apply. So I had to race through all the paperwork, and I had to go get my waiver from my heart murmur again. And so I went up to the Air Force Academy, which is right nearby, and saw the chief cardiologist there, and he goes, well, guess what? You don't need a waiver. You don't have a heart murmur. So yes, in the 7 years since pilot training, it turns out they had better equipment to look at the heart, and they have different criteria, and now they consider that I did not have a heart murmur. So it was an interesting point in my life, though, but I ended up getting accepted to test pilot school as a flight test engineer, a backseater type, and now I had a chance to go do that. And finally, after 7 years after leaving Cal, I had a chance to fly these airplanes that I always wanted to do, and it gave me another direction in life. And one of the things that I struggled with at that time was, though, is this a vain pursuit of mine? Is this something that I just want to do? Doesn't God want me to do something different, like Dr. Ho is doing, or something that has a more impact on people? Am I just driving toward my goal? One of the things that I found is that I have a passion for airplanes, and I think God gave me that passion. And when God gives you a passion like that, that's where you can excel. And as tough as test pilot school was, it was very, very difficult, long hours and stuff. I loved doing that stuff, and so I could excel there, and I could graduate and do real well. And having done real well, and then all of a sudden having this heart murmur not be a problem anymore, that started bringing up the old astronaut dreams. And you're going, oh boy, here we go again, chasing after dreams. And so I decided, well, okay, well, I'll go ahead and throw in the application. What could hurt me? 3,000 people apply. What's the chance of this really happening? So, and when you first apply to be an astronaut, you kind of keep it quiet because you don't want all your buddies to know, because then they're going to say, hey, how's it going? How's it going? And then when you don't get accepted, you feel bad. So you don't tell a whole lot of people, but you send the application in, and then they call you for an interview. And then everybody knows Rex is going down to NASA for an interview. And so you go down there and interview and go through all the medical tests, and then it comes back and it says, sorry, we didn't accept you. You're just not what we need now. So it was one of those processes again where, hey, well, that's okay, but at least I got to fly airplanes and stuff. And along the way, another good thing happened. I met a wonderful woman who became my wife. This is about 15 years ago, Margie, and we were married. And she encouraged me to continue on with this dream. So 2 years later, I got more experience. I flew more out at Edwards as a flight test engineer. And I was very fortunate. In 1996, I got selected as part of the astronaut candidate school. Now, sure, after many years, I got this incredible goal that I had always wanted since I was a little kid. But can you imagine the path? I mean, who sets out when they're a kid saying, you know, I want to be an astronaut, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to pilot training, and I'm going to get eliminated for medical reasons. Then I'm going to get sent to North Dakota, the middle of nowhere, and then I'm going to go all these other places, and I'm sure that'll work, you know. But if you look for the view from above, and I think what God was trying to do in my life, I really feel that was the right place, and He led me where He wanted me to be. So, got down to Houston, and it's a long process to fly in space. You start down there, and you get 2 years of basic astronaut training, where you learn all about the space shuttle and the space station, and you train in very different environments, and eventually you get assigned to a flight. Well, after about being down there about 4 years, I got assigned to my first flight, and it's a pretty amazing thing, but it's still very hard to imagine that you're actually going to get a chance to fly. But you start training, and it turns out my area of expertise was spacewalking, so I trained in a pool. So I trained for my first flight about 200 hours underwater. See, here's me upside down right there, holding onto a nitrogen tank. And so we practice real hard and work real well together, and again, practice over and over what we're going to do in space. Unfortunately, we get to fly in jets, which, as you've heard maybe a little bit, I enjoy doing. And so I fly in the back seat of these jets with the pilots to the various meetings and to the various training events. And then we train in the simulator. There's a shuttle simulator. They throw all sorts of disasters at us so that on the real day, when a real thing is happening, when you only have one or two little problems, you can handle them real well. And then they start getting your shuttle ready. And here's where it starts getting a little bit surreal. This is Atlantis, and what they're doing is they're lifting it on a big crane. They're going to put it down on the external tank and mate it, and then they start rolling it out to the launch pad. Here you see Atlantis in the stack rolling out to the launch pad here. And as exciting as it is, your first time, it's just really hard to think that you're going to be sitting up there. I think, is that really going to happen? And so when you get closer to flight, and it's about a month or a couple months from flight, you start thinking, okay, what could go wrong? You know, and you start crossing roads, you start looking real carefully before you, holding onto the rails on the stairs and stuff, And so there's always that in the back of your mind. Is this one of those times where we're going to get right to the cusp of my dream and somebody's going to pull the rug out? So it's as much as I should have had the faith that, hey, everything's going to work out, whether I fly or not, it's going to work out. It's still, especially when it's going on for 6 years, you're wondering, is it really going to happen? Then they get the vehicle on the launch pad, and about 3 hours prior to launch, they get you all suited up, and you head out to the launch pad, and they strap you in real tight. And for about 3 hours, you're doing comm checks, and everything's going pretty well. And then but you never know for sure if it's going to be the launch day. It could be a little bit of weather problems, could be mechanical problems. The shuttle was supposed to launch yesterday. They had a hydrogen leak. That kind of thing happens. But the big event that you're waiting for is at about T-minus 6 seconds. The space shuttle main engines start up the power right there, and you feel a huge rumble. And you feel the rumble, and you don't take off yet because these solid rocket boosters here, they're still bolted down and they haven't lit off yet. So for 6 seconds, the engines burn, and if they're all burning properly and all the engines are operating at 100% like they're supposed to, the main computers will send a signal to the solid rocket boosters. They will light, and then you're going flying whether you like it or not. So as a first-time flyer, you're sitting in the cockpit, and you're looking out the windows. and you feel that rumble. And you're thinking, come on, come on. And then you feel this boom, and off the pad you jump, and away you start going. And your eyes get real big, and you have this, I remember distinctly having this incredible adrenaline rush thinking, this is it. I'm really getting to do it. I'm going to space today. They can't change their mind. I get to do it. They're stuck with me. We're going. And so it was absolutely an incredible rush. And now I'll show you a little bit what it looks like from inside here. This is on the launch pad here, and they're putting me in, and that's me in the middle there in the seat here. A little waving, and they get the guys in the mid deck here. And then once they get them all strapped in, they skedaddle about 3 miles away. Here's us in the flight deck.
Main safety systems armed. Sound suppression system water activated.
TLS is go for main exit start. Oh yeah. All right, 300. Here we go. 7 seconds, Steve. There's the roll. See it. Wow. This is rolling through them. Oh, really? Man. Atlantis, go with throttle up. Atlantis copies. Go with throttle up. There's a Furby 6.
There you are, 0 to 17,000 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. It is quite a ride, as you can imagine. It's an absolutely amazing experience. Now here's the other view from above. It is absolutely spectacular when you get up there and you get a chance to get used to it. It takes a little bit of getting used to getting in space. You know, I had this impression on my first flight that when I finally got to space, I would, float up to the window and gaze on the majesty of the earth, and it would, the birds would sing and the clouds would part, and it was pretty. But what you got to realize on the first day of a space shuttle mission, it's kind of a war zone. You're tearing everything apart, trying to get all seats down. People are actively sick, throwing up, and you're not feeling great. And so you're kind of doing your job, and you look out and you go, yeah, that's beautiful, and then you get back to your job, So. But you trust me, once you get used to being in space and your body adapts, it is absolutely spectacular. You see here on this picture here, just an idea of the scale you can see. Over here is Cape Cod. There's Long Island, New York City, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Delmarva Peninsula, and then down to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So you can see from Cape Cod to North Carolina in one fell swoop. Absolutely amazing. The other thing I like to point out is this little thin band. You see that little thin band, the blue band there? That's what keeps us alive. That's the atmosphere. That's all there is to it. It is absolutely awesome to see that kind of thing. And I remember distinctly on my first flight, there was a time where I kind of had a view like this, where I looked off to the side of the Earth and I could see that it was, no kidding, a planet hanging in the middle of a void. And it scared me a little bit. And it just was like, and I had to tell myself, okay, I know the God who made this. This is okay. I haven't seen this before, but this is all right. It really is absolutely awesome. And of course, you got to look at your hometown. This is San Francisco here. And on my flight, I had one of the big things I wanted to do is I want to see San Carlos from space. And I looked at pictures. Beforehand. I knew that if you looked, you can see the highways from space. You can see Highway 280, and you can see Crystal Springs Reservoir. And I knew that if you looked at the southern tip of Crystal Springs Reservoir, opposite side of 280, you'd be right at San Carlos, where I grew up. And so we came on San Carlos in my first flight. San Francisco, you can see the Bay Area coming up and think, okay, great, I got some binoculars. You need binoculars. But I looked at binoculars, I found Crystal Springs Reservoirs, 280, went over there, bang, there's San Carlos. It was absolutely amazing. To look at that same backyard where I used to look up and watch the airplanes flying into SFO and think, here I am flying over at 25 times the speed of sound, 250 miles. It's just an absolutely amazing thought. Hawaii. This is Egypt, Cairo, Egypt. You see, and cities from space are gray like this. And the funny thing to try to do is find the pyramids. And the pyramids are where Cairo meets the desert. So if you look a little closer here, right there, the pyramids. So I took that picture on this last flight. The aurora is spectacular, absolutely beautiful. On our first flight, the aurora, it has the reds. You kind of can't see it right here with this light, but the reds were on top, and it was behind the space station as we undocked. Not quite this bright, but it was still spectacular. Cities from space. Again, there's your nice little atmosphere that keeps us alive. Of course, got to do some work. This is me outside of the U.S. laboratory, or the European laboratory module we brought up on the last flight. My job was to do spacewalks. We outfitted and prepared the Columbus laboratory attached to the space station. That's me outside. Got to wait for the camera, mug for the camera a little bit. And this is the space station. That's what our job was, to go up and add a new module to the space station right there. Now, another thing I like to point out is when you're on the cusp of your dreams, you finally achieve your life dreams, you're flying in space, you think, well, all those little times, those little detours and those little places you went, they probably won't even come to mind. But a funny thing on my first flight is I was on the shuttle Atlantis, and we were floating around. I looked out, and I go, we're flying over North Dakota. And my buddies look out and go, yeah, you know, it looks like farmland down there. And so I'm like, yeah, that's North Dakota. So I grab a picture, I grab a camera, and you know, even though that was a very hard assignment out in the middle of nowhere, it had become part of me. You know, I learned a lot from that, and part of what I was from North Dakota. So even though I'd gone on, I hadn't forgotten that, and it's amazing how those little detours and those little sidetracks you take in life, sometimes they end up meaning a whole lot to you, a lot more than you think they're going to. And so I grabbed a camera and I started taking pictures, and I was hoping I could get Cavalier. Now, again, town of 1,500, you're 200 miles up, traveling 25 times the speed of sound. It's not easy, but I was trying. And so I took a bunch of pictures, got back down, and I was about 15 miles off of Cavalier. Darn! And so this last flight, I was trying to figure, I wonder if I can get it. And so I was really trying again, and sure enough, there it is, Cavalier, North Dakota. So I got my picture this time. The other thing I like to share, one of the verses that means a lot to me from my space flights is Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. You just can't avoid that. It's just an amazing thing. And I think it takes more faith to believe that there isn't a creator when you see what's out there than it does to believe that there is a creator. And this picture right here, some of you have probably seen it. It's taken from the Hubble Space Telescope. They pointed it, I think, at just a speck of the sky that was very dark, and they just let it expose and expose. And these little things here are galaxies. And each one of those is 1 billion stars. And it's absolutely phenomenal to think what God has done. And the paths that he has for us are amazing. And sometimes it may be hard to believe that, but when you believe that what he's made, billions and billions of these stars and planets, it's absolutely an amazing thought and it really gives you an appreciation of how creative our God is. Finally, it's time to come home, which is before my first flight was before Columbia. My second flight was after Columbia. So before the first flight, I told my wife, you know, after the main engines shut down and the rockets stopped burning for 8.5 minutes, you don't have to worry about much. But then after Columbia, obviously that wasn't the case anymore. So they had to worry for a long time. And so it is harder on the families than it is for us. But we got down safely. And I'll tell you, as exciting as the mission was, I think the best part was right there when I got off the shuttle and got to see my wife and my boys. And it's an amazing journey. And as you can tell, it took a lot of different turns and a lot of different U-turns, wrong turns, everything. But the view from above was that God had a plan for my life. And it all worked out despite times where it didn't seem to look like it was going to work out at all. And so I hope that encourages you folks to all think about that in your life, and that even when it seems like things are going in strange directions, that God, who made this incredible universe, is also still in control. So thank you.
See if we have the mic on, yeah. Well, Rex, thank you very much. Cheryl, thank you very much for your messages. You heard two very different forms of service. And service is really something that comes from the heart. As you saw with both Rex and with Cheryl, it's their faith that has really motivated the service. And, you know, I believe that God places each one of us in positions in which we can serve. And no matter what it is that we're doing, we could be a teacher, a parent, a retail clerk, a truck driver, a business executive, a doctor, or an astronaut. And I believe if we view whatever role we have as that of serving other people and serving God, I believe the world would be a much better place if we were to do that. Well, you've also heard this morning a bit about prayer and the role that prayer plays in the lives of people. And I know that there may be some people here today that have real burdens and also or may want a blessing. So we do have a prayer team that would be very happy to pray with you. And if I'd ask the prayer team, the three individuals, to just stand up for a moment. Janet, Stephanie, and Cyril. And they will assemble over here on the right. So if you would like personal individual prayer, maybe a blessing, they'd be very happy to pray with you. So right after the program is over, they'll be there. And also, Cheryl and Rex have volunteered their time. So if you'd like to come and ask some questions, we'll have Cheryl and Rex come over on this side as well. So we always try to have some kind of follow-up to this event. I mean, our hope is that people, when you came today, you've listened, that you've been inspired in one way or another. So again, we have volunteer opportunities with the nonprofit organizations that are out in the hallway. Also, a small group opportunity. And if you've come and are sort of curious about what it means to have a relationship with Christ, or curious as to what it means to pray, that there is a small group opportunity, and let me just read this. We're calling it Christianity 101. It's a 3-session discussion group on how to get started with God, open to people with no spiritual background and those who are at the beginning of their faith journey. Sessions will happen late in March and early in April, and the time and place to be determined. And I know a little bit about this because I'll be the person that's leading it. So if you're interested, see me or also on these response cards. Fill them out again. And I would just, if you could be conscious right now, if we have white envelopes on the table, if we could have somebody on the table be responsible for those white envelopes. And if you fill out this card, and if you want to just put your name, we'll just notify you about next year's event. If you're interested in any of these information from the nonprofit organizations, check that. And any comments that you might have. You know, we're always trying to improve what we're doing here. So if you have any comments, please write those below. And if you would like to be involved in that small group, you can add that there as well. So now we have a few minutes. So we'll have a little discussion around the table. And then I'm going to call us back, and after I call us back, we'll sing a rendition of God Bless America, and then you're dismissed, and we should end up close to on time. So as we have a brief table discussion, why don't you talk about what might have struck you by what either Cheryl or Rex had to say today, and maybe in particular about the whole topic of the joy of serving. So have some discussion, and I'll call us back in just a few minutes.